This is the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center podcast. I'm Alex Victora, Assistant Center Director of the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center here in sunny Tucson, Arizona. This week, we're talking to you about fuel geysers. Surely you've heard the term fuel geyser. If you've not heard the term fuel geyser, you live in a cave in the woods. There's nothing wrong with caves in the woods, okay? Let me just say that right there. Come on out of the cave, throw on some sunscreen, your hat, your shades, grab your earbuds, and listen in. For this week's podcast, we're talking to Ralph Gonzales. There's a lot of reasons I like talking to Ralph. We talk about surfing, not that I know anything really about surfing. We talk about RVs, because I want to retire and live in an RV. We talk about mountain bikes, but mostly we talk about fuel geysers and fuel. Ralph's an engineer with the United States Forest Service, and he's one of the experts on what we've been calling fuel geyser events for the last couple of years. Ralph and his team have been doing a bunch of work to try to figure out what fuel geysers are exactly, what causes them, what are the conditions, factors that contribute to fuel geyser events, and what, if anything, we can do about them. Ralph helps us separate fact from fiction in this week's podcast. Check it out. Here's Ralph.
My name is Ralph Gonzales, and I'm a portfolio manager for the Fire and Aviation program with the National Technology Development Program. And I'm here in San Dimas, California, one of our two centers. The other one, of course, is in Missoula. So I've been involved with this fuel geysering ever since the incident on the Humboldt-Toyabe.
The thing that Ralph just referenced, the event that took place on the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, is called the Willow Peak Firefighter Burn Injury. That's the name of the report, the Facilitated Learning Analysis report that was done in response to this really severe burn injury that took place on a single tree fire, May 25th of 2015. The Willow Peak report is important for a number of reasons. It's the report where we're first introduced to the term fuel geyser. Fuel geyser. Fuel geyser. What's a fuel geyser? What? A fuel geyser? Fuel geyser is now a term that we don't want to hear. It's no joking matter what can happen when fuel sprays, in some cases violently, out of a fuel container, a chainsaw, a piece of power equipment. It's no joke when fuel sprays out from one of these fuel containers and coats a firefighter who might be feet from open flame. Some of the burn injuries that we've seen reported are really severe. And that's why in June of 2015, when the team was taking a look at what happened on the Willow Peak fire, it was really critical for folks like Ralph Gonzales to get involved. Back to Ralph.
You know, it's part of the things that we do within TND is to look at accidents or incidents that have happened and look at the technical side and see if there's a safer way to do it on the engineering side. And I think I was involved in the program just because my experience with spark arresters and chainsaws and small engines that I've been working on since 1995 when I started the Forest Service.
Now Ralph and I are going to play a bit of a game of true and false. It's a way to kind of get at some of this fact, fiction, myth, reality surrounding what it is that fuel geysers are and, as importantly, what they're not. So, as we play this game of true or false, keep track in your own mind. If you think the statement I share with Ralph is either true or false, then check yourself against Ralph's answer. Here we go. To start off, here's something I think I've heard folks say, true or false. Fuel geysers only happen on hot days. True or false, Ralph?
You know, that's a false statement. You know, it'll happen on cooler days or milder days as well. You know, higher elevation sure has an influence on it, but the fuel really is part of the issue in getting, however the fuel is heated up, whether it's the radiant heat from the fire, but not necessarily just the ambient temperature. So it could happen on cooler days as well.
Okay, good. Here's another one. True or false? Fuel geysers only happen to chainsaws.
Yeah, that's a false. Just because we've had other incidents that are not involving chainsaws. You know, we've had issues on SIG bottles, we've had issues on Dolmars and leaf blowers. So it's not necessarily just powered equipment; it just could be fuel containers as well.
Right.
And it's a function of pressure and temperature and fuel. So anything that has a fuel tank, and it could be heated up. Geysering could happen.
Yeah. Did you have a fuel geysering event happen to you last summer? Am I
I,
making
I,
that up?
sh- I sure did, and thanks for bringing it up, and thanks for reminding me to bring it up. Yeah, so my incident, and this is the deal. I've been working on this fuel geysering for a while, and I should have been more aware, of fuel and stuff. And we were at the Pioneer Fire last year, and we were collecting fuel samples on. Front of fire, there was an incident with one of the crews out there on a chainsaw. We were collecting fuel samples, and we had a jerry can full of fuel. Where it was midday, so it was sitting back of the truck, exposed to radiant heat. I adjusted the cap of the jerry can, just because I thought it didn't sit right. And once I opened up the cap, the fuel just came out, exploded out, geysered out, whatever the term is, and got me right in the face. And if I had an ignition source, or if I didn't had my eyes closed fast enough, it would have resulted in injury. But yeah, and that's a good example of a non-chainsaw, non-powered equipment that could geyser.
Yeah, sorry to bring that up, but I think that just hammers home the point that this really can happen to anybody with any fuel tank. It doesn't have to be a chainsaw fuel tank, which we tend to hear of frequently, given some of the fuel geysering chainsaw events. So, continuing on with the fuel tank kind of theme here, true or false? Fuel geysers only happen to equipment with the flip lock or the quarter turn caps that we see on steel chainsaws. True or false?
Um, that's false as well. And again, basically the mechanism of it happening is as the fuel gets heated up or superheated, meaning it gets heated up above its boiling point, and the rapid release of pressure or the rapid depressurization would cause that geysering. So certainly that you see that on the toolless fuel cap that still has, because the operator is able to open it up. But for threaded caps as well, if you open it fast enough and not allow it to vent, it'll certainly happen to that. Like the jerrycan had a threaded cap. Sig bottles have threaded caps as well, and those would geyser. Dolmars also have some sort of threaded cap, a coarse threaded cap, but it would happen to that. So not necessarily just the steel toolless fuel cap, but it'll happen to any cap as long as that pressure is released pretty quickly.
So let's talk a little bit more about fuel here, and here's one that I think I've heard, or some version of this. Uh, True or false? Fuel geysers only happen with low octane fuel or fuels that have a high ethanol content. True or false there, Ralph?
So that I think both of those statements are false. I guess I'll take the high ethanol content first. So with high ethanol, like the E10 fuel, and we've had recorded incidents, and the one being the Pioneer Fire, it was an E0 or zero. There's no ethanol in the fuel, and those guys are dead as well. Certainly with the ethanol content, that makes it more volatile. Um, um, and also with the volatility, there's some rules as far as how fuel is blended. If you add more ethanol to it, then you have more leeway as far as the volatility is concerned. So that's a false. It'll happen on an E0. It'll happen on an E10. Um, the octane number is a little harder to pin down, and I guess I'll call that a maybe. It's not really a true or false 'cause we don't have any more information on it. But we've had incidents of geysering at the higher octane than 89 and 91 octane levels. In the lab, we use a 91 octane E0 fuel as our test fuel because we could get it consistently, and we were able to make those geyser. The key is the fuel and how volatile it is, regardless of octane rating, regardless of ethanol rating. The octane rating is usually for knocking, for engine knocking. But if your engine is knocking, perhaps your operating temperatures will be higher too. So that's the part we don't know, and that's something we're chasing down also as we continue on with our testing in the lab.
Okay, and while we're talking about fuels here, can you say anything definitively about, summer blend or winter blend, or how any of those sort of different blends of fuel may or may not impact fuel geysering events?
Yeah, and really, that's a really big factor this geysering problem. I guess we refer back to the what we're calling a geysering triangle, where there's heat, pressure, and fuel is one side of that triangle. And the reason fuel is a big component of that is because fuel changes by month and by state. There are requirements, and um, there's a standard, it's an ASTM standard that requires or have minimum levels of volatility, and that changes from state to state and month by month. So, for example, if you have a winter blend or you have fuel blend in Montana in January, that's a totally different fuel from the same fuel you would get in Montana in August. And the difference is because the fuel blenders have to make fuel that would work in cold weather. So for colder weather, you want it to be more volatile because you want the engine to start when it's cold for cold weather performance, and the opposite is true when it's hotter, so it's less volatile. So if you take a winter blend in summer-like conditions, so like in the spring, like where we are now, we're in transition, where you have warmer days and you get a volatile fuel, and you're using it in summer-like conditions, you could heat that past, where you get superheated and the pressure builds up pretty quickly, and that's where you have the potential of geysering as well. So it's really important that when you use fuel, you only use nothing older than 1 month, because you're within that change.
Okay, yeah, that's good info. Thanks for that. Um, Moving kind of into what it is that we think we know or don't know about fuel geysers. One thing I've heard people say is that the agencies, maybe the Forest Service in specific, the Forest Service isn't doing anything about fuel geysering. That's something I've heard. So true or false, the Forest Service is not doing anything about this issue.
Yeah, that's a false. We've been working on this quite a bit, and we're really taking I guess I've been describing it as a three-prong approach. We want to take a look at engineering solutions first. How could we solve this providing an engineering solution that doesn't require an operator to do something. So we pursue an engineering solutions, from vented caps to uh, trying to protect the fuel tank from heating up. Um, what we're also doing is we're trying to describe on the engineering side, what's a mechanism, how does geysering happen, and how do we tie it into the fuel, the type of fuel, or if we were to put a requirement in the chainsaw safety standard, there's the chainsaw standard, what would it requirement be? So in order for us to do that, what we need to do is we need to look at fuels, look at different pressures, different temperatures, and conduct those tests. And we've done over 400 tests of pressure and temperature, and all we're doing is heating up fuel, opening up the cap, and seeing what happens. Controlling a lot of the variables. What we're also trying to do is we've been going out, and we did this last year, is we're looking at what are the actual conditions where the chainsaw would see. So what are the natural or the operational temperatures and pressures in the fuel tank. So we're able to go to fires, active fires, and we're able to drop a data logger so it lasts for a couple days, and that those data loggers will measure pressure and temperature. So we have a baseline of pressure and temperature in the fuel tank, and that again goes into the chainsaw safety standard. What requirements do we put in? Um, so that's the engineering side. We're also looking at the operational side. We're also looking. So what could the operator do to either prevent the risk of injury from fuel geysering? How do you troubleshoot a vapor lock saw? How do you troubleshoot a flooded saw? Or telling the difference between the two. What process do you to check with the with the opening the fuel cap is the last thing you want to do. We're working with the manufacturers. We're working with the carburetor manufacturers on this, um, to see how we could make that happen. We're taking input from operators as well, and seeing what their best practices have been, and we're sharing that with folks. And that's the third piece of our approach, is the national awareness or awareness campaign, that whatever we find out on the engineering side, whatever we find out on the operational side, we're feeding it through the national awareness campaign. we're putting like this podcast is a big part of that. We're preparing videos. Um, all the information that we have, we're trying to share that information through the national awareness campaign. So the three-prong approach, the engineering, the operation stuff, and releasing everything through the awareness campaign is kind of what we've been doing. We've been doing for 2 years.
Okay. So clearly, you guys in Forest Service engineering are doing quite a lot with this issue. That's great. Another thing I've heard, and maybe about a year ago, I had seen a prototype of a modified cap, and that leads us to this true false here. Um, and this one is the Forest Service has an engineering fix, but they don't want to share it with firefighters for one reason or another. True or false?
That is false, and we thought we had a solution, and part of finding out whether it's a true solution or not, because it really the stakes are pretty high. We can't really get things wrong. We want to make sure that the solution works for everything and not just a certain part of the country, if you will. So we had a solution, and the solution was putting a larger O-ring, it's a half a millimeter larger O-ring, and on on the fuel cap itself, replacing the OEM or the standard O-ring with a slightly larger one. So that's what we had in the laboratory testing. That was pretty promising. We've had, and we made 100 caps, and we sent them out to folks to try. Um, so they were using it, and we were getting good feedback on it. But then when we started testing again in the lab, looking at that solution, at the engineering solution with a larger O-ring, and we were able to reproduce geysering when we used different fuels. We were starting off, our test fuel was California fuel, which is a pretty low volatility, and when we switch our fuels, we started seeing able to reproduce geysering. So we thought that that's not a robust enough solution for us to implement nationally. So we pulled that back, and then we went back to the drawing board and looked at other things that we could work on. Certainly, the threshold is pretty high. We want to make sure that whatever we recommend would actually work for everybody, not just a portion of the state or a portion of the country. Um, so there is no solution yet. We're working on an engineering solution, and as soon as we prove that out, as soon as we have assurance that will work for everybody, we will release that as well.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I had seen some of those caps and was eager to. I was at the time when I first saw it, I thought it might be the solution and pretty simple solution, but I guess it didn't work out as you just said. So, um, shifting gears here. Um, let's talk a little bit about fuel geyser reporting. And here's something I heard somebody say recently that if you experience a fuel geyser event, we want reports of that data or we want reports of that event. True or false?
Oh, that's absolutely true, and that's really critical for us. Because I really think that the geysering is an underreported event. I think there's more incidents there than we were really hearing. And the reason it's a critical point and people need to report when it's they have incidents of geysering, whether it results in an injury or not, is we need to know what the conditions are. In the last 2 years when we've had geysering incidents, again, not necessarily resulting in injury, what we try to do is to try to get a sample of the fuel. So it's really critical that when that event happens, that they preserve a sample of the fuel, and we need about a SIG bottle full, enough to do fuel analysis on it. We'd like to know the ambient conditions as well. How hot it is, how high, what was the elevation they were working on, what kind of work were they doing? Was it a chainsaw? Was it a blower? Was it a SIG bottle or a jerry can? I guess in my case, and be able to report that and track that down, because every little bit of information that we have also kind of feeds into, okay, we're starting to define what the conditions are, and it kind of goes back into the chainsaw safety standard. And so how do we build that? Is it also reasonable for an operator to think, expect that this is going to geyser or not? So it's really critical that we get that information, that real life information, real incident information is very valuable to us. And being able to get those fuel samples, the model of the equipment, the conditions, the elevations, and all that stuff is critical to what we're doing.
As Ralph just mentioned, reporting fuel geyser events is critical. We feel like fuel geysers are vastly underreported events, and maybe that's because most fuel geyser events don't come with burn injuries, which is a good thing. If you're involved in a fuel geyser event, regardless of whether there's a burn injury, a fuel ignition, or equipment damage, hopefully there's none of those things in your case. But if you're involved in a fuel geyser event, we want to know more about it. To report your fuel geyser event, you can do two things. You can come to the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center homepage, wildfirelessons.net. And on our homepage, we've got a little slide deck of images rolling by, and there's a content rotator image. That's what we call that thing. There's an image there with 2 links for fuel geyser resources. So check it out on the Lessons Learned Center homepage, or do a quick Google search for National Fuel Geyser Awareness. And even if you misspell fuel geyser, like I just did, the first result you'll see is a really handy website with some great resources. And that website has a link that will take you directly to the fuel geyser reporting tool. And finally, the fuel geyser reporting tool can be found at the following website, bit.ly/ that's the one that's leaning to the right, / bit.ly/ fuel geyser report, all one word. bit.ly/ fuel geyser report. Reporting fuel geysers is critical. Don't worry about the technical details. Don't worry about whether you can do this anonymously or not. You can. Help out the fire service by helping provide data. Okay, now back to our game of true and false. We're almost done.
The next one I want to talk about is the recent steel recall. I think I've heard people kind of share that, or seen people share that, with social media, etc. And I've certainly interacted with folks who think, hey, there we go. Finally, there's been a recall. That's going to fix the issue. So the true false here, I guess, is, and this might be a maybe, but the recent steel recall will fix all this. And true or false there?
I think you're right. I think it's a maybe. We don't know. Certainly a pinch fuel line or a leaking fuel line, could contribute to increased temperature, running lean, but we don't know that, and we're doing more testing on that. But certainly the recall is for that. It wasn't for fuel geysering. Yeah, it's a maybe. We don't have enough information through it. We have contacted the manufacturer, asked those questions on whether um, it's related or not, but we haven't had a response back from Steel.
Okay, but I guess so. The bottom line there for folks who've maybe had their saws into the shop for that recall, at this point, we're not confident saying that those saws are any necessarily any less likely to geyser at this point in time. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a fair statement. I think not at all. I mean, just because there's some older saws with that seemingly didn't have that problem, like the 460s and even the 440s before in the past, or the 382s in the past that have a geyser, and really not. We didn't think it had a pinch fuel line. So yeah, I think just be mindful. Anything could geyser is the approach we want folks to take. Um, and whether it's been in the shop for that recall fix or not, it still has the potential.
Okay, very good. And the last one here, and this is one I've heard a few different times, and that's this sentiment that this whole problem, this fuel geysering issue, can be attributed to clean air standards or EPA regulation. So is that a true or false? The clean air and EPA standards are responsible for this fuel geysering thing. How would you categorize that? True or false?
I would categorize that as a false. In fact, we're actually working with the EPA on this fuel geysering problem. With the clean air requirements, certainly there is a trend for increasing operational temperature. When you start running leaner, of course, you get an increase in temperatures, operating temperature. Um, then there's also the permeability requirements in the fuel tank. But when you look at all that, and when you actually look at all the EPA requirements, what the EPA requirements do is they put performance requirements, and it's up to manufacturers how they're going to meet that or not. One manufacturer chooses to do one way, and the other manufacturer chooses to do another way. So there's multiple solutions to meet that requirement. So that's why I'm saying it's a false. It's not something that they force down on folks, but it's more of the manufacturer's choice of how to meet those requirements.
Okay, very good. And you've alluded to or touched on this a few different times, but this idea that modern saws, for a number of different reasons, are running hotter than maybe saws that are the old 44s versus the 440s, 460s, 461s, and the steel lines. Can you talk a little bit about why it is that more modern saws are running hotter?
Yeah, we have information on chainsaws, operating temperatures, and performance information on them. From back till the gosh, the 70s perhaps. And looking at those chainsaws, we were able to pull the head temperature, exhaust gas temperature, and compare those. And there's a trend of an increase in the operating temperature as indicated by the exhaust gas and head temperature. And we're thinking that does coincide with the emissions requirements, the clean air standards, because they have to run the different technologies that would run higher temperatures. On consumer saws, they're starting to put catalytic converters now on those, and with catalytic converters, those will run a little hotter. So that's just a sample of the technology they're introducing. But there is a trend, and part of it is that emissions requirement, being able to run leaner, and the emissions a little cleaner perhaps. So there is that trend of heating increase in operating temperature.
Okay. Um, that's kind of it on my true false bit here. Is there any sort of final point that you'd like to communicate to folks with regard to fuel geysers? What should folks be thinking about in your mind here?
Yeah, that's always in back of our team here, our minds, making sure that that it's an incident we don't try to repeat again, and being mindful, being aware of what fuel does, and for a lot of us, it's muscle memory, and we're trying to break that muscle memory, making sure that treating the saw, treating the jerry can, the sig bottle as a potential for geysering. So opening the cap, being mindful of where you are and the ignition source. Um, Making sure that if you're having trouble with your saws, making sure it cools down. You kind of lost already your operational tempo when your saw is running poorly, um, and you're troubleshooting. So just the best thing to do is for now is just let it sit for about at least 15 minutes, let it cool down, it'll go back again. So I guess my message, is just be the awareness piece is what we have for right now. Uh, Treating every saw, every piece of equipment that has gasoline in it that's going to geyser, um, and just that awareness piece, the change of behavior is really critical.
Okay. Well, Ralph, we've gone through a bunch of stuff here. That's super handy. Any other things you wanted to chat about with regard to
Yeah.
what you guys are up to and so on? So,
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to stress is, we've been looking at this solution for about 2 years, and certainly, the more minds that we have looking at this or having ideas, whether it's the operational side or the engineering side, we're open to suggestions. We're open to, hey, did you guys check this out? Did you guys look at this? All that stuff. Having more people be thinking about this, thinking about solutions, and providing it to us. And the website's a good place to do it, along with the incidents, the reporting of incidents. There's a critical piece. We don't claim to have all the answers. Sometimes we get blinded because we are looking at it for so close for so long. So having people's feedback, people's ideas and stuff shared with us is really good as well.
okay, very good. And I'd seen mention, I think, in one of the fuel geysering updates that I'm seeing here, that there's going to be stickers maybe on cash saws. Is that, can you describe those?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So we're working with the national caches as well, and they own about 4,000 of this chainsaws, at least steel chainsaws. And what we're trying to do is again increase the awareness, And I know the last thing people want to see is another sticker on a chainsaw, but if we could just just it's a reminder, it's a constant reminder for the chainsaws. It's going to be right on that the air cleaner cover, and it's just a warning sticker saying, this could geyser, and just even just that hesitation that folks will get when they see that sticker and say, oh yeah. This, it could happen to me. It surely happened to me. So having that pause, having that sticker, uh, we hope will help. Then along the same lines, we'll have posters, and again, it's a national awareness campaign trying to share every information that we have that has been confirmed, that has been validated. Uh, we'll get it out to folks.
Well, there you have it. A discussion with a real-life engineer, Ralph Gonzales, on fuel geysers and the factors and conditions that influence when a fuel geyser can happen. How'd you do on the true or false? If you got them all right, leave us a comment below and we will send you a full case, not a half case, but a full case of high fives. Yeah! To read more about fuel geysers, check out the National Fuel Geyser Awareness Campaign website. Get there with a Google search of these words, Fuel Geyser Awareness. Fuel Geyser Awareness, quick search of that should get you to the National Fuel Geyser Awareness Campaign website. Once there, you can do a bunch of things. Watch videos, read fuel geyser incident reports. Maybe most importantly, you can report a fuel geyser incident. With the Fuel Geyser Incident Reporting form, it's a quick form. You can do it online, you can do it on your phone, you can do it anonymously. If you have a fuel geyser, fill out the reporting form, please. And finally, thanks so much to Ralph Gonzales, who's a super busy guy, for taking the time out of that schedule. Ralph's always in the airport, he's always in a meeting, he's always on conference calls, and he took some time out of his schedule. Thanks a ton, Ralph. Lastly, tell us what you think of the podcast. Please let us know. Send us an email, a tweet, a Facebook message, a postcard. Subscribe to the podcast any place you find podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or podbean.com. Leave us a review and tell your friends. Thanks a ton for your time. See you next time.